Lucinda, are you there?
I'm here. I'm just waiting for a couple more participants to join, and then we will get started.
All right, thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Lucinda O'Hanlon. I'm the head of policy and strategy at Sanitation and Water for All in the SWA Secretariat. And while we're waiting for more people to join this webinar, I'll just go through some housekeeping notes. Firstly, please select in the globe at the bottom of your screen your language. We have interpretation into English and into French. Please choose the language that you would like to listen to this webinar in and that you will be speaking in. I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. I see several people are already doing that. That's great, so that we know who's with us here today. And then I also invite you, as we get started with the discussions, to put your questions in the chat. The team will be filtering those questions to me, and we will have a Q&A session at the end when I hope we'll be able to go through some of these points. With that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So after several months of collective action from numerous partners, we're here today to officially launch our most recent publication entitled Water and Sanitation, Realizing Human Rights and Achieving Sustainable Development Goals, a handbook for parliamentarians. You can see on the screen the proposed agenda for this session. So we're going to start with opening remarks from our CEO, Katerina de Albuquerque. Then we're going to go into two examples from parliamentarians in Bangladesh and in Mali. We'll have a presentation from my dear colleague Miata Setali about the contents of the handbook. And then we'll have a short video of our key partners who will be presenting examples of how they've been working with parliamentarians and with the guidance that's provided in the handbook. Then, as I said before, there will be time for questions and answers, and we'll have concluding remarks from the chair of our steering committee, Dr. Patrick Moriarty. So welcome everyone again, and without further ado, I invite our CEO, Katerina de Albuquerque, to offer us some opening remarks. Katerina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lucinda, distinguished partners, and dear friends. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you also to this session to launch the SWA Parliamentarians Handbook on the human rights to water and sanitation and the related SDP goal and target. Today at this global webinar, we will be discussing how parliamentarians can support the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation, and in doing so, how you can promote sanitation and water for all, always and everywhere. The human rights to water and sanitation, as you all know, are internationally recognized human rights, although their implementation continues to be uneven, leaving at least 2 billion people without access to colleagues, can I please ask you to mute yourself, because I'm hearing some noises, some background noises. Thank you so much. So what I was saying was that even though water and sanitation have been recognized as human rights and hence constitute a legal obligation for any UN member state, the truth is that the implementation of these rights continues to be uneven, with at least 2 billion people without access to safely managed drinking water and 3.6 billion without safely manage sanitation. And this is even more serious when we think that the human rights standards are higher than what I just referred, safely managed, in the sense that human rights require quality and safety of services. So despite the progress that we have made, significant challenges hinder the achievement of SDG 6.1 and 0.2, particularly in poor and marginalized communities everywhere in the world, be it in rich or in poor countries, and especially for the most vulnerable people. And as we know, COVID-19 threatens to stall or reverse progress in many areas, in many countries. We believe that if we want to achieve the 2030 Agenda promise of leaving no one behind and ensuring 100% of access to water and sanitation for all, of course, if it's 100%, it has to be for all, we need people-centered dialogue and action. Parliamentarians should be a core part of this dialogue and action. As critical decision makers, parliamentarians, you should fulfill 4 roles, as you know. First, parliamentarians represent the constituents and the communities. Second, parliamentarians contribute to policy making. They pass legislation, you pass legislation, to ensure the realization of these and other human rights. Third, you parliamentarians oversee and monitor the implementation of laws and policies on water and sanitation, and parliamentarians are crucial for ensuring accountability of the executive branch of government. And finally, parliamentarians assess and request budgetary allocations for water and sanitation services. They approve budgets while advocating for transparency and in how resources are spent. When I say our, I mean SWA's engagement with parliamentarians is part of our 10-year overall strategy. One of our 3 strategic objectives is precisely to build and sustain the political will to eliminate inequalities in water, sanitation, and hygiene. In short, through this objective, we are aiming to reach up to key decision makers, including parliamentarians, heads of states, and heads of government, as well as ministers. We do this in a variety of ways, and I will highlight 3 important pathways we pursue to achieve this objective. First, we organize high-level dialogues with political decision makers, such as the sector ministers meeting, which took place earlier this year in May in Indonesia. Number 2, through our illustrious Global Leadership Council, which includes former heads of state and government, as well as other global leaders who are champions for water and sanitation, we also reach high-level decision makers in order to put the evidence before them on the benefits of prioritizing and investing in water, sanitation, and hygiene. And thirdly, we foster the links between water and sanitation on the one hand and the broader development agenda on the other hand. For instance, and referring again to our recent sector ministers meeting, it brought together not only water and the water and sanitation sector ministers, but also ministers of health, economy, and environment. And it was a very deliberate effort to center place water and sanitation as contributors, as key to sustainable climate action, as well as foundations upon which to build health and economic recoveries. We know that achieving SDG 6 requires collaboration across the entirety of the SDG agenda, and we cannot do this alone. So the engagement with parliamentarians is a component of this effort to elevate water and sanitation in political agendas. This is the 3rd handbook that SWA has produced, and I encourage you to also use our other resources focused on human rights and on financing, all available on our website and in different languages. Today's handbook comes as a direct response to requests that we in the Secretariat received from many of you, from our partners, seeking to engage with parliamentarians, or even from parliamentarians who have shown interest in having more guidance and more support in order to better be able to perform their functions. So this handbook will serve as a practical reference for the parliamentarians themselves, but also for advocates everywhere on actions that you can take to fulfill your political, legislative oversight, budgetary, and representing roles. In doing so, parliamentarians will contribute more effectively to the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation and the attainment of the related targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, and without further ado, I am very thrilled, I'm honored, I'm pleased, I'm happy to launch the Parliamentarians Handbook, Water and Sanitation, Realizing Human Rights and Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I hope that this resource will be helpful to you in your crucial work, and I look forward not only to hearing the discussions today, but also to hearing from you firsthand how you have used this handbook in order to promote work in your national parliaments on water, sanitation, and hygiene. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Katerina, for your inspiring words and framing this webinar for us so beautifully. As you said, we strongly believe that the handbook will play a key role in upholding human rights in the pursuit of the SDGs, and we sincerely hope that it will be useful to all of our partners around the globe. So we're moving now into the next segment of our agenda, which is focused on leading by example, insights from parliamentarians. And we'll be hearing in this segment about the real life applications of some of the recommended actions described in the handbook. So I'll start by welcoming Barrister Shamin Haider Patwari, Member of Parliament of Bangladesh, and from the constituency Gaibanda 1 and from the Jatiya Party. Welcome, Barrister Patwari. Can you tell us more about the point of order in the parliamentary procedure in Bangladesh to ensure the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation? Barrister Patwari, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me in this very useful webinar. And I'm very happy that you're launching a handbook for parliamentarian. Yes, of course, every change need political will, and every change need politicians' involvement, active involvement. And member of parliament being elected from a constituency, they have a national commitment, they have international commitment, they also have constituency commitment, and that they have to fulfill. We have to fulfill. Obviously, this is one of the fundamental human rights, right to water, right to sanitation. The state must give enough resource for this, for fulfilling these fundamental rights. But there we really need a strong pressure, collaboration, and partnership within government, within parliament, outside government. Because in Bangladesh, we have two-way approach. One, the government is focusing more on structural development or roads, highway, and bridges. But on the other hand, government also trying to give lots of tube oils, lots of sanitation facilities. But it's a small country with huge number of population, 160 million officially. And also it is affected by climate. So I'm sure SDG include a constant supply of safe water. But I'm from a constituency where for 3 months, 1/3 of my constituency went underwater every year. So that 3 months, how we can really handle this situation, sanitation and supply of water. So that need a climate lens as well, and a forecast, because the challenge that was before us in 2020, in 2025, because of the global climate, water rise and other issues and global warming, the challenge is unpredictable now. So the policymakers, global and national, of course, they have to adopt a climate lens. They have to consider the climate perspective when they try to ensure this SDG goal. It's a very difficult and tough goal to achieve. I'm sure the government has a real bona fide public will, political will to ensure it, but how? The modus is very important. It's high time to embrace evidence. It's high time to collect evidence. It's high time to listen to the academicians and economists and not to waste money after the recession and COVID or pandemic or stagflation, whatever you say, every dollar count now. And it's also important that people's involvement. I often offer many models. One model could be people build their own sanitation and clean water system, and they can reimburse some money from government. So there are some models we have. Also, I think it is high time we include politicians, local government, parliamentary government, and bureaucracy and academicians all together. We need a whole society approach. We need a whole government approach and whole NGO approach. The government alone can't do it. The government must understand it. The bureaucracy must understand it. It's a gigantic mammoth task. Without inclusion of every stakeholders, it's impossible to achieve. Within the parliament, I think it's high time to form a caucus or something to achieve SDG 6. And if you can facilitate that with 20-30 active MPs, we can form a caucus who will actively monitor these activities within the parliament and use their parliament instruments to ensure it. During the budget time, these 20 MPs can shout that we need more budget for safe water and hygiene and sanitation. They can ask questions to the ministers. They can even approach interministerial approach, and they can ask the prime minister as well. That is important. Resource allocation should be our at the moment prime concern, and how to use this money in a quality manner. We need the evidence, how to use this evidence, and how to use this resource. And also, the ministry must have a separate division or directorate to handle it. And the ministry must include the local NGOs and local civil societies and local partner organizations. It's important the local partner organizations, they include it in the process, because if you are sitting in an ivory tower from the capital and give a policy, it will not work out. But the very local NGOs, local youth organization, local government, they can be effective implementing hand for this agenda. I think the advocacy should also be that the government must have an open and transparent system. It is too bureaucratic at the moment. It is not inclusive. And that's why even if the government giving resources, it's difficult that the resource will be utilized in a proper manner. Also, you can select some MPs, one sub goals of the Prime Minister's responsibility to the MPs or executive MPs who can be challenged in clean water. One MP can be champion in hygiene. One MP can be champion in sanitation. I think it's high time we compartment the issues and allocate responsibilities to ministries as well as MPs. One MPs can be ambassador or best ambassador or champion. I think in this situation, the handbook you are proposing, you are launching today, it will be a great help. I will have a look at it, of course, and other resources. And also, if you can arrange a seminar inside the parliament with all parliamentarians in presence of a speaker and launch elaborating this handbook, I think that will be very useful and very helpful. Thank you very much. I will not take much longer time. It's an honor and privilege that I have been included in the process. Thank you very much. See you again.
Thank you so much, Barrister Patwari, for these very important and concrete points about the role that parliamentarians can play. You opened and led by emphasizing the importance of political will. And at SWA, we couldn't agree more that progress starts with leaders deciding to be leaders and manifesting that political will to achieve SDG 6. You also said quite a bit about the importance of participation, multi-stakeholder action, involvement of local organizations, and that everyone has a role in getting us to where we've said we want to be. We've heard your call to establish a caucus in the parliament in Bangladesh, and also to organize a seminar for parliamentarians in Bangladesh, and SWA is ready to follow up on that with you and to work together with you on that. So thank you for making those suggestions. Our next panelist from Mali is running slightly late. And so what we're going to do now is I'll turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Miatwa Sitali, who is going to give us an overview of the handbook. Miatwa is the head of our country engagement team. Over to you, Miatwa.
Hi, Lucinda. Good morning, everyone. And what a fantastic opening. Thank you so much, Katarina, for also going through the background of how we came to actually develop this handbook. Katarina, a colleague of ours, Manishka and I were in Mali a few years ago, and the head of the SDG Parliamentary Committee mentioned that a handbook like this would be very useful to the parliamentarians, especially those that are new to Parliament, but also given the fact that we had already made the step change from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore the implications of the SDGs insofar as what Parliament needed to do were really critical, and a handbook like this was going to be helpful. So thank you so much, Katarina, for highlighting the history also of this having been demand-driven. I found the remarks by Barrister Shamim Patwari from Bangladesh extremely insightful, and Lucinda, you already highlighted a number of those. I think the presentation that I will make will build on some of the things that he and Katarina highlighted. So if we could move to the next slide. The presentation that I will make will just give us a few insights in what you will find in this handbook. Please do visit our website. You will find the handbook in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And it's a full with examples on different parts of how parliamentarians could contribute. It also has examples of how other partners could also support the parliamentarians to contribute to the achievement of the human right to the human rights to water and sanitation. So moving on to the next slide, why did we work on this handbook? I've given a little bit of that history, but it's just a crucial component, this handbook, in terms of the realization that parliamentarians have got a crucial role to represent the voice of the people. They shape and approve legislation. They also review and approve budgets, and they have this oversight role of the executive. So these are huge and enormous responsibilities in decision making, as well as a power in terms of influencing resources. So this is a very crucial part of why this handbook has been prepared. The overview of the handbook, you will find that this handbook is a reference guide to provide good practices and experiences from parliamentarians in different countries, and also from parliaments, as well as from different types of stakeholders, in terms of how they have engaged with these four mandates of parliamentarians. It highlights these four areas, as I said earlier on. That's the role of the parliamentarians to represent their constituencies, the role of parliamentarians to create and monitor legislation, and the role of parliamentarians with regards to oversight of the executive, and finally the role of parliamentarians to approve and monitor national budgets for water and sanitation. The handbook is divided in 4 parts. So if we go to the next slide, and I think 3 critical parts that I'll just highlight here. The handbook goes into the details to elaborate on each of those 4 roles. So you will find that in the more or less section 2 of the handbook. And then it also highlights the structures and tools that parliamentarians can use to improve water and sanitation services. So it provides additional resources as well that parliamentarians can use. And this includes institutions, but also places where parliamentarians could go to find information. As I stated, this is not just for MPs, for parliamentarians, it's also for those of you that are working closely with the parliament as a whole or with individual parliamentarians. If we go to the next slides, we would like to highlight from the onset the crucial and fundamental role of parliamentarians in terms of the obligations that they have as part of the state structure. Human rights define the state as duty bearers and individuals as rights holders. So every person is entitled to adequate water and sanitation services, and states are obliged to guarantee access for all using the maximum of their available resources. The legislative branch of parliament, or the legislative branch of states, of governments, including all parliamentarians, therefore play a crucial role and they bear a major responsibility for the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation. Therefore, states have the following obligations, that is to respect these human rights to water and sanitation by creating an enabling environment for people to exercise their rights to safe water and sanitation. States have a crucial role and obligation in terms of protecting these human rights and human rights to water and sanitation by preventing third parties from infringing on rights of people to safe water, water supply, and sanitation services. And they also have an obligation to fulfill these human rights to water and sanitation by enacting policies, laws, and providing funding to progressively realize the human rights to water and sanitation. I nearly said aggressively, but I think it is also right that they should pursue the achievement of this human right to water and sanitation in using all the available resources. So I think they should use whatever tools that they can find in the toolbox. The human rights to water and sanitation require non-discrimination and equality. It requires participation, which should be inclusive, diverse, and meaningful. It's not right just to have a table and people sitting around the table. Their conversations and input should matter to the outcomes that emanate out of that table. The human rights, the obligations also relate to transparency and accountability, which are crucial to the achievement of the water and sanitation human rights. Now, we'll go to the next slide. So on this slide, the human rights to water and sanitation and their relationship to the SDGs as a whole. This was one key point that we also had in Mali, but we checked afterwards with other partners and friends, and we understood this was a crucial role. So a crucial aspect that the handbook needs to cover. So the handbook covers not just the sustainable development goal targets for water and sanitation and hygiene, but it also puts all the other goals and targets that are related to it. And in particular, Sustainable Development Goal 16 and 17, which promotes peace, justice, and institutions. And 17 is about strengthening the means of achieving the SDGs. However, you will understand, and our honorable MP from Bangladesh, Barrister Shamim, did highlight the link to climate. So you will see that the handbook will cover the links to climate, to health, to food and nutrition, and to other SDGs that are crucial. So that's really important in undertaking these different responsibilities that parliamentarians have. So I'll go a little bit in detail on the 4 roles that I mentioned earlier on that parliamentarians have, and starting with the role of representation. If we could go to the next slide. Under this one, the handbook covers a number of examples and provides ideas on what parliamentarians can do, including having water, sanitation, and hygiene in party manifestos, so that these can already elaborate the vision that as political parties, what they would do if they get into government. And then more crucially, linking this to the voice and the needs of the people. So listening and articulating the needs of the constituencies. The handbook also provides examples on the evidence base that constituents could bring to these discussions. It raises awareness among the relevant government agencies, and also the examples on promoting public awareness and engaging media. These are different roles these are different actions that parliamentarians can take, including building alliances with civil society, academic institutions, and others. There are, of course, a lot of examples. One example is from Liberia in terms of how parliamentarians have built a relationship with civil society, and that has been very helpful to budget discussions, but also in overall legislative discussions. And on that note, we move to the next slide, which is about legislating. This is one of the a significant responsibility that parliamentarians have for drafting, reviewing, and passing legislation. This role is key to ensuring that laws further the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation, and that they contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. You will see on the screen several ways through which parliamentarians could actually achieve this legislative function. And one example that I'll share is in Costa Rica, the human right to access to drinking water was added through Article 50 of its constitution, through the law number 9849 and on June 5, 2020. So this was already 5 years after the SDGs. And in that law, it states that every person has the basic and inalienable human right to access to drinking water as an essential good for life. Water is a national asset indispensable to protect. It is therefore indispensable to protect this human right. So you have these examples, also examples from Nigeria and several other countries in terms of how parliamentarians could use legislation to actually further the achievement of the human rights to water and sanitation. I will go to the next role and responsibility, which is on oversight. On this one, parliamentarians work to monitor and oversee the work of the executive branch of government and to ensure that they comply with international, regional, and national legislation, with policies and commitments relating to water and sanitation services. I'll just highlight one example here of, because some of the ways through which parliamentarians could do this is to pose questions on access to water and sanitation. They could create or use standing committees. So one of the examples that came already from Bangladesh. And one example of a parliamentarian posing a question, a parliamentarian in the UK asked the UK Prime Minister about government commitments to investment in water resilience, projects around the world following the 2021 COP26 deliberations that were held in Glasgow. So this parliamentarian really linked climate to what the government was doing and asking what exactly they were going to be doing in terms of investments or in achieving this commitment, particular investments in water and sanitation. And the last role is on budgets. And this one also, on this role, parliamentarians play a crucial function in authorizing and monitoring budgets. This is one of the most important and powerful tools that parliamentarians have, and they could use it to ensure that resources are available to comply with legislation and regulations, and also implement policies and plans which are critical to realizing the human rights to water and sanitation. And there's several examples here of how parliamentarians push for this when the budget is announced, but it's also important to start before the budget is in the budget formulation stage. And it is also important to follow through when there are accountability measures. I highlighted earlier on that the different examples in the book, in the handbook, also resources that parliamentarians can use. And we'll move to one slide after this one. And the next, just to highlight also that it is really crucial for parliamentarians to use their role and to do everything that they can to prevent corruption in order to improve service provision. That they will, parliamentarians could also be aware of the types of corruption that service providers experience and even practice, and also work very hard to fight this corruption, and also present themselves as very strong supporters of transparency and accountability in their constituencies, but also in their work. And we're grateful to partners who've also worked in this area. Lucinda, I will end at this point, and thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sitali, for walking us through the contents of the handbook and spelling out some of what our participants can expect to see when they go look at the handbook on our website. And as Sitali said, it is there on our website for your perusal, and we encourage you to have a look and also to get back to us on how you're able to use it. We're going to move now to a video, which is a compilation of testimonies from our partners who can speak about the impact that parliamentarians can have if they take on some of the actions that are outlined in the handbook, but also how they, as non-governmental actors, advocate to get parliamentarians to take action. And I think this shows the important role that everyone has for getting us towards the achievement of SDG 6. So please, let's show the video now, team.
I'm very happy to know that SWA have launched parliamentarian handbooks, and it will be very useful handbooks, as I realized, because as I am one of the members of that preparatory stage of this handbook. So at the beginning, the handbook was very much result oriented, and I have engaged in this process since its formulation stage. And at the beginning, I have met and discussed some of the parliamentarians in our country in Bangladesh, and they have understood and they liked this approach, because so far they know that this is the first time of kind of handbooks have been produced or formulated related to water, sanitation, hygiene. So it will be very useful for them for using as a reference book, and they can accordingly work on it. I think this handbook will be very useful for them, as because it has guided numbers of initiative, it has put numbers of experience, and how parliamentarians can take initiative in water, sanitation, hygiene, budget allocation, and its implementation. That has been very much clearly understood by the parliamentarians, because parliamentarians are the main policy makers who participate in the budget discussion during the parliaments. And in Bangladesh, many parliamentarians are very much vocal on different subjects, different agenda. So if they found this handbook, I think that will be very useful for them to follow up on it, and how water, sanitation, budget can be one of their major issue of the commitment that can also be relate in this process. And the impact mainly in two folds. Immediate impact, that there was no guideline that how parliamentarians can talk on this water, sanitation, hygiene, because wash is a political issue, and in coming budgeting process, it is very important to organize the pre-budget discussion and open budget discussion before the parliament session.
My name is Shail. I am part of the organized private sector in water, sanitation and hygiene, which is a national umbrella body dedicated to housing private sector-led solutions in the wash sector, tackling various angles of the challenge. Now, OpsWash was inaugurated by the Federal Ministry of Water Resources, which in itself shows decisive support for private sector engagement in the sector, and also the importance of coordinated multi-stakeholder responses to the crisis. And to this extent, Nigeria has done really well in contextualizing the SDGs in their entirety to its own political and legal landscape. And since the Millennium Development Goals, we've transitioned through a number of legal and policy instruments, translating to what we have now as the Executive Order 009 and the Declaration of a State of Emergency, which has of course been signed at the highest levels of government, that being the presidency. So we have the Clean Nigeria Use the Toilet campaign, which was comprised of the contents of these aforementioned legal instruments. And in tandem with this, we have the Clean Nigeria Use the Campaign Steering Committee, which is chaired by His Excellency Vice President Prof. Yemi Osinbajo Sam. Now, this committee is quite diverse. OPSWASH represents the private sector, while USAID and UNICEF represent development partners. We also have 17 line ministers, state governors, and the chairman of ALGON, which is the Association of Local Governments. And this is very important because it ensures that strategies and policies are trickled down to the federal level and are implemented on the local government levels. So to provide some examples of how this committee has been operating in practice, recently there was a proposal for the Clean Nigeria Agency Bill, and the steering committee was invited to debate and discuss the establishment of this. So while lawmakers felt it necessary to regulate open defecation more, the private sector felt that it would encroach on aspects of efficiency, given that we already have existing functions and policies that the bill proposed. So another example is the installment of blue bonds and tax incentives infrastructures. And the framework of these were largely developed by a financial institution under OPSWASH. And using the platform of the steering committee, we were able to bring this forward to sector ministers and the finance ministers for further deliberation and, of course, final implementation. So I would also say that the campaigning on the presidential level of the socio-economic benefits of investing in WASH has also changed corporate behavior in the country. More and more we're seeing big private sector organizations expand their CSR profiles to include WASH, especially given its nexus with climate change. And this is, of course, a direct result of political will at the top. So as Nigeria continues to strengthen these mechanisms and structures in place, we would encourage other country partners to really contextualize and understand the SDGs in their own political and legal landscapes. Thank you.
Hola, mi nombre es Jorge Mora Portugués, soy coordinador de la Red Centroamericana de Acción del Agua FANCA, estoy basado en Costa Rica, en América Central. Desde hace muchos años nuestra organización comprendió la importancia de que coordináramos el trabajo con los parlamentarios y parlamentarias de la Asamblea Legislativa de Costa Rica y de los otros congresos de Centroamérica. Desde muchos años atrás hemos venido realizando acciones para incorporar en nuestro accionar la formulación de leyes de recursos hídricos e incluso logramos el año pasado la reforma de la Constitución Política de Costa Rica para que se reconociera finalmente el derecho humano de acceso al agua potable en nuestro país, que ahora es un principio constitucional. Se han desarrollado leyes de recursos hídricos en diversos países, como Nicaragua, como Honduras, y las organizaciones de sociedad civil que forman parte de la red FANCA han jugado un papel muy importante en su formulación, en su revisión y en el accionar de una serie de acciones para lograr que se aprueben estas leyes de agua. El manual que están presentando hoy, SWA, viene a sistematizar y a hacer más metódicas estas acciones de incidencia sobre los congresos y las asambleas legislativas y los parlamentarios, de forma que sean más sistemáticas las acciones, más efectivas y se tenga mayor impacto. Por eso es muy importante conocer y aplicar este manual. Y para los congresistas y las congresistas que tienen interés en los temas de recursos hídricos, el manual también les es muy útil para poder tener mayor impacto, mayor difusión, mayor posicionamiento a nivel de la sociedad con estos temas. Así que les invito a conocer, profundizar, estudiar y sobre todo aplicar este manual que ha hecho la SWA. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for that video and hearing. We're appreciative to those partners who explained how they're working with parliamentarians and how they're able to use the handbook. We're going to move now into the questions and answer session of the webinar. And I encourage you to put your questions in the chat. Our team has been tracking the chat to look for your questions, but to my knowledge, none have come through yet. So I'll start with a question to one of our participants who's on the line, Mr. John Oldfield. John, you're an advisor with the Swiss Water and Sanitation Coalition. Could you tell us more about your participation? Could you please provide our participants with more information about the work you're doing with MPs in Africa to establish or strengthen WASH caucuses? John, please.
Lucinda, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Just very briefly, my work with the Swiss Water and Sanitation Consortium is to advise their 8 Swiss NGO members on advocacy for WASH in healthcare facilities and WASH in schools and also WASH in communities. I think that I have certainly brought this handbook to the attention of those 8 members and the Swiss Development and Cooperation Agency. I think it will be useful in their efforts to advocate in their own countries at a national and at a subnational level, at city councils, for example, on behalf of institutional WASH. So I'm grateful to SWA and its many partners for this. I would also quickly respond to your question about caucuses. Representative Vincent Willie from Liberia corrected me once at a session in Dakar earlier this year. I said water is politics, as our friend from Bangladesh did just now. And he says, John, water is not politics, water is good politics. And I've been inspired by Representative Willie's statement there to do what I can to help launch and strengthen parliamentary WASH caucuses in as many countries and as many states in larger countries like Nigeria and India as possible. And as we know, as we heard from His Excellency in Bangladesh, a WASH caucus is simply an informal group of members of parliament who work together to advocate from within parliament to promote the specific agenda. Many such caucuses exist for all sorts of the other SDGs, but very few for WASH yet. I don't think these caucuses are revolutionary. I think that they just need to be applied to SDG 6. And I think that this handbook is a fantastic way to accelerate progress on those WASH caucuses. I've prepared a couple of documents. I'm working with several countries, including Uganda, where their WASH caucus has been around for over a decade right now, to promote this concept, and happy to share that and be a resource to SWA and its partners. Thank you, Lucinda.
Get myself off mute. I'm sorry. Thank you, John, for sharing that experience with us, and also for your help in disseminating the handbook with the partners that you work with. We have a question that's come through from Senegal about what advice we could give on the essential elements that need to be integrated into constitution making in order to protect the human rights to water and sanitation. And Katerina, given your background in human rights and your expertise as a human rights lawyer, I wonder if you would like to say a couple words about constitutions and recognition of the human rights to water and sanitation. Over to you, Katerina.
Merci, Lucinda. Je pense que,
Thank you, Lucinda. First of all, I would say that it's important to entrench this right, to say clearly that this right exists. For example, to say that the Constitution recognizes these human rights to water and sanitation. Depending on the type of constitution and the legislative details in the Constitution, I believe that the Constitution could stipulate those different elements that are part and parcel of this human right. For example, the access to water and sanitation should be given to any person living in the applicable territory. This needs to clearly stipulate that those rights should be afforded to everyone universally, and that these services must be of quality, must be affordable, they must be physically accessible and that they need to be guaranteed to all without any sort of discrimination. And additionally, beyond these standard laws, the content of the law needs to be further developed by adding additional criteria that can help to elaborate a bit more when we discuss concepts of quality, accessibility, proximity, and the need to fight against discrimination. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Katarina. I appreciate that. We have another question that has come through from one of our steering committee members, Doba Lovemore, asking about the plans that are in place beyond the launch of the document to ensure that SWA member countries embrace it and use it. And Sitali, I wonder if you would like to say a couple words about next steps after this launch. And then I think we're going to have to start looking at wrapping up. Sitali, over to you on next steps.
Yes, thank you so much, Lucinda. So, of course, the handbook is a big milestone, and we're grateful to everybody who's contributed to its preparation. We're really strongly encouraging partners in different countries to use the handbook, so distribute it to your parliamentarians. To use its material in terms of holding conversations with parliamentarians, and also focus on those 4 respective areas and make sure that in the right moments they could make the right interventions. We are also encouraging partners, especially during the budgeting cycle, in the legislative cycle, to use the handbook to promote and strengthen the achievement of the human rights to water and sanitation. We're currently working through our work plan this is from the Secretariat's point of view for 2023, and we'll see in terms of what resources permit for the future. But we really think that the partners have got a very crucial role to play in advancing the use of the handbook, starting now and not having to wait until the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sitali. We have another question specifically for the Honorable Shaneen from Bangladesh, but unfortunately he's left. I will mention the question, though, that Lydia would like to know the caucus on WASH, where was it anchored? Is it through a parliamentary committee or through the ministry responsible for water? We will try to get that answer for you, Lydia, and get back to you afterwards. I really regret that our participant, the MP from Mali, was unable to join in the end. He was detained by other urgent issues, as so often happens with parliamentarians who are doing work on many different fronts. But we know that there's going to be a launch event, a ceremony in which the handbook will be handed over to the Commission Development, Rural and Environment, Sanitation, Water and Energy, and our partners, the government actors, but also civil society and Action Contre la Femme in particular are leading on this initiative. So I just wanted to express gratitude to the partners in Mali for all the work that they're doing to put this handbook into action. Indeed, as Sitali said in his presentation, I think the initial impetus for the handbook was born in Mali, and we're very happy to see that follow-up happening. I would like to turn now to the chair of our steering committee, Dr. Patrick Moriarty. We're coming to the close. So many interesting things have been shared on this webinar. Patrick, could you please provide us with some concluding remarks and a call to action on how we move forward?
Sure, thanks, Lucinda. And yes, it looks like people can hear me. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good whatever it is, wherever you are. Yeah, what a pleasure to be here. Greetings from Accra, Ghana, where I'm currently with about 300 folks at our All Systems Go Africa Symposium. Almost all of them SWA members, by the way, so we've got a great SWA turnout here. And with everyone from the vice president down to mayors and local councillors. So I think this is a hugely timely conversation, and really welcome this great new publication that we brought out. And by the way, I would say parliamentarians, yes, and also councillors, and also any elected representatives at any level. I think I really liked what John said. You know, caucusing isn't something magic. Caucusing is something we should all do, maybe because too many of us, and I speak for myself, have an engineering background and we just want to go and talk about facts and figures with people. We feel uncomfortable with the idea of building and supporting caucuses, but it's essential. It's essential. It's that essential step between civil society, the grassroots, and government. And I think it's also really great to see that we are slowly unpacking our understanding of government as a sector. I think we had a very unsophisticated understanding, and I think I love that we're now beginning to understand that government is something very big with many different branches, and of which elected representative parliamentarians, councillors are a hugely important part. So I'd really like to, as Lucinda said, take the opportunity, as well as thanking everyone involved in this great webinar, to put out a call to action. And that's, you know, firstly, to any parliamentarians who are listening. But again, I'd broaden that out to anyone who's elected to represent any constituency, anyone who's spoken. I just want to reiterate the messages we've heard today. Water and sanitation are human rights, clean water and safely managed sanitation. They're also public services. And I really liked the point that John made as well about that they represent good politics. And not only that, they represent politics that almost no one disagrees with, right? Lots of stuff gets very politicized, but there's no reason to politicize water and sanitation. Providing safe and safely managed water and sanitation services is something that any politician, whatever wing, whatever the color of your politics is something you should and can unite around to deliver to people. People appreciate access to safe and safely managed water and sanitation services. And frankly, they vote for politicians who deliver them. So there's key actions that you can take to help to deliver that political will that's required to put water and sanitation higher on the extensive list of priorities that I know that all countries face. So I call on you to develop cross-party parliamentary committees to build alliances, cross-party, involving everyone to discuss productive ways of identifying and addressing the gaps in access to safe water and safely managed sanitation. Parliamentary committees provide an excellent opportunity to engage not only with parliamentarians from across the country, but across the political spectrum, but also to engage with experts, with communities, to develop multi-stakeholder public hearings that can advise on water and sanitation needs in your country. And such committees can also be used to assess and review legislation, as we've been hearing, and policies to ensure that they're fit for purpose. And of course, to explore whether financing is sufficient for water and sanitation needs. And I also call on parliamentarians and other elected representatives, where you see that water and sanitation aren't gaining sufficient attention, to ask questions in Parliament, in Council, on water and sanitation, to demand answers on the institutions and the regulatory frameworks that are needed to deliver services effectively and efficiently. And Lucinda, you were also mentioning the important role that civil society plays, and I would also like to call on our civil society members. International and national non-governmental organizations, the private sector, you also have a role to play. Your job is to draw parliamentarians, your public representatives, to draw their attention to water and sanitation and to the critical role that they can play in raising the political value of water and sanitation. We all have a role to play in this. We're all citizens of somewhere, and we all have a right to make our voices heard. And if your representative doesn't know of this handbook, bring them a copy, send them the link. Draw attention to the actions proposed in the handbook. Ask your representatives to join or initiate a parliamentary committee or on water and sanitation. Draw attention to the necessity of access to water and sanitation services for all economic and social development. Demand that your parliamentarians put these public services on the agenda at parliamentary question time. Sanitation is often seen as a taboo subject, and it is, but actually that gives it power. We can name it, we can talk about it. People don't like to talk about poo. People don't like to talk about nasty, smelly things, and we can use that. And we need to normalize debates around sanitation, and perhaps particularly in Parliament. And this is therefore also a call to action for civil society organizations working in the global north. Make sure that your representatives are also aware of this handbook. And I mean, I know that IRC in the Netherlands, one of the things we do is that we motivate and support a parliamentary caucus in support of SDG 6 there. And I think that's something that's really important to do. Propose that water and sanitation are prioritized in development financing, and push for questions to be asked in parliamentary questions about progress on SDG 6. Without the political prioritization of water and sanitation, without attention paid to developing the best legislation and the most effective policies and strategies, we're not going to reach the SDGs. We're sitting here in Africa and we've heard presentation after presentation saying that 45 or 46 out of 48 countries are on track. We do have a big problem, and we have got to raise sanitation and water up the agenda. We can't realize the human right to water and sanitation without all of your efforts, and especially parliamentarians. So thanks for the opportunity, and back to you, Lucinda.
Patrick, thanks so much for those concluding remarks and that call to action to encourage us all to move forward with this agenda, to engage with our parliamentarians, to know that we all have a role in making this happen. And thank you also for joining us while you're concurrently hosting another important event. I know you need to leave. Katerina, I know that you also have obligations elsewhere, but for those of you who can stay on the line, we would encourage you to stay, because we do have the pleasure to have Honorable Sidibé now, Sidibé from Mali with us now, and we are pleased that you are able to join us. Vous êtes bienvenue. Honorable Sidibé, so Patrick, Katerina, thank you. We're going to continue for those who are able to stay. Honorable Sidibé, you're the Vice President of Rural Development, Environment, Sanitation, Water and Energy Commission in Mali. And I understand that there are plans in place for a launching ceremony in Mali. I mentioned this before at the Parliament, and we first just want to express our gratitude to Mali for the efforts that you're deploying to engage with parliamentarians on this important topic. Could you tell us a bit more about your experience on parliamentary engagement for the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation in Mali? And how can this handbook support your actions in this regard? Honorable Sidibé, you have the floor. Vous êtes là? Honorable Sidibé, we may be having some technical difficulties. If so, I apologize for that. I see the video now.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Vous êtes en direct avec le Parlement du Mali, le Conseil national de transition. C'est un grand honneur pour nous de participer.
We have the huge honor of taking part in this exchange on the absolutely essential matters of access to sanitation and water. It is important. Sorry, the interpreter apologizes. This is barely audible. Water and sanitation today are an important topic in national and international budgets. And we did not want to miss this opportunity. It is important for us to know that water and sanitation are areas that have a huge impact on the health of both our citizens and of the animals. So we wanted to take part in this initiative on water and sanitation. So thank you. We are very honored to be able to share in this moment with you. We have very important legislative projects underway, but it is important to take part in the worldwide debate on access to water and sanitation. So thank you, whoever you are and wherever you are.
Thanks to you, Honorable Sidibe.
I'm the chairman of the Commission for Rural Development, Environment, Sanitation, Water and Energy in Mali. Thank you. I am Doire Saliba Koulibaly, and I'm responsible for the protection of youth and sport, and I'm delighted to take part in this live debate on water and sanitation. I'm also the president of the promotion of women. And as we know, women are very interested in water because in the areas where there is no water, it is the women who have to get up before anyone else is up and who go to bed after everybody else has gone to bed in order to fetch water. So I'm very interested in taking part in this debate. And we know that the International Convention for Human Rights talks about access to water. So thank you for putting water and sanitation on the program for all populations.
Thanks to you and the entire team in Mali for your leadership, your commitment, your passion. We can see from the room that there is real commitment to the issues, and SWA is grateful to be able to partner with you on these important topics. As you said, this is an important debate. Unfortunately for today, our discussions need to come to a close, but this is not the end of the discussion. The handbook launch is just the beginning, and we hope that these discussions continue at national level, at subnational level, as John was mentioning about city councils, and also at the global level. So thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you to all of our participants for staying on a bit longer. And thank you to all who have made contributions in the chat. We have taken good note of your interventions, and we will continue the conversation with you. Thank you so much to everyone. Have a wonderful day.